The following episode is based on publicly available sources and is intended for educational purposes only. It includes details of violence and may not be suitable for all listeners. Discretion is advised. She vanished in the time it takes to pour a glass of wine. No scream, no trace, just an empty bed, and a mystery that would grip the world for over a decade. What really happened to Madeleine McCann? In every crime, there's the story you hear, and the truth buried beneath it. You're listening to The Case Room, where we dive deep into true crime stories from around the world, one case at a time. Episode 7. The Lost Hours. The Disappearance of Madeleine McCann. Before we open today's case, please note that this episode contains references to child abduction, child sexual abuse, and disturbing details surrounding the disappearance of a minor. It also discusses rape, sexual violence against minors, disturbing criminal history, graphic descriptions of past offences, and references to paedophilia. Discretion is advised, particularly for those sensitive to crimes involving children or unresolved cases. The content may be distressing or triggering for some listeners. Please take care while listening. Your well-being matters. Listener discretion is strongly advised. It was the kind of holiday many families dream of. Sun-washed beaches, warm evenings, and the simple joy of shared time together. In May 2007, the McCanns arrived in Praia da Luz, Portugal, seeking rest and routine. But what began as a carefree trip would unravel into one of the most infamous missing persons cases in modern history. 3-year-old Madeleine McCann vanished from her bed in the family's holiday apartment while her parents dined just meters away. In the hours that followed, confusion turned to chaos and a global media storm ignited. What happened in those lost hours? How could a child disappear without a sound, without a trace? And why, after years of investigations, suspects, and relentless headlines, do we still not have answers? This is the story of a little girl whose face became known around the world, and the mystery that continues to haunt us all. Chapter 1. The Missing Girl. Who was Madeleine McCann? Madeleine Beth McCann was born on May 12, 2003, in Leicester, England, to Jerry and Kate McCann, both medical professionals. From the outside looking in, theirs was a picturesque family. Jerry, a consultant cardiologist, and Kate, a former general practitioner, were raising 3 young children, Madeleine, their eldest, and twins Sean and Amelie, in Rothley, a quiet village in Leicestershire. Their home life seemed grounded, normal, and filled with love. Photos of Madeleine show a child with a signature smile and strikingly large, bright eyes, one of which had a distinctive coloboma, a rare eye defect that caused a visible mark in her right iris. That mark would later become central to one of the most famous missing child posters in modern history. The McCanns were, by all accounts, loving and hands-on parents, devout Catholics who placed a high value on education, faith, and family traditions. Jerry's background was in Glasgow, Scotland, while Kate hailed from Liverpool, 2 strong working-class cities that shaped their values. Their careers in medicine gave them both a deep sense of duty, structure, and problem-solving, traits that would become both assets and burdens in the years following Madeleine's disappearance. In late April 2007, the family travelled to Praia da Luz, a small resort town on the Algarve coast of Portugal, for a holiday with a group of 7 other adults and their children, a total of 9 adults and 8 children. The trip was intended as a peaceful getaway, a chance to enjoy the sun, sand, and time with close friends. The group, later referred to by the media as the Tapas 7, named after the tapas restaurant at the resort where they regularly dined, included doctors and professionals, many of whom had known each other for years. They chose the Ocean Club Resort, a sprawling complex of apartments and villas, complete with pools, tennis courts, and a staffed creche, a perfect holiday setup for families. The McCanns were staying in apartment 5A, a ground-floor flat with 2 bedrooms. It had sliding glass patio doors that opened onto a public walkway on the side of the building and a small gate leading to the street. Although secure by appearance, the setup would later come under intense scrutiny. The Ocean Club's childcare options allowed the adults to enjoy time together while their children played under supervision. Each evening, the group followed a routine. Dinner at the tapas bar at 8:30 p.m, while the children slept in their respective apartments nearby. Rather than use babysitting services or the resort's evening child watch program, the parents took turns checking on their children in regular 20 to 30-minute intervals. It was a system built on trust in their surroundings, in the resort, and in one another. But it was also a system that would come under severe judgment in the months and years to follow. Madeleine, nearly 4 years old, was a bright and engaging child, energetic, curious, and affectionate. She was in the nursery at her preschool and loved books, swimming, and pretending to be a mini-mum to her younger siblings. Her disappearance would soon turn her into a global symbol, one that embodied both tragedy and a parent's worst nightmare. The McCann case would go on to dominate headlines worldwide, spark international investigations, and generate countless conspiracy theories. But before all of that, there was just a family on holiday, making memories in a sleepy resort town by the sea. And then, in one devastating moment, it all unravelled. Chapter 2. The Night of the Disappearance. Thursday, 3rd May 2007, was the 5th night of the McCann's holiday in Praia da Luz. A day that began like any other and ended in a storm of grief, confusion, and suspicion. It's a night seared into the public consciousness, not just because of what happened, but because of what was left unknown. The morning started normally. Kate and Jerry took Madeleine and the twins to the Ocean Club's kids' club at 10 a.m. Madeleine was reportedly in good spirits. Staff members later recalled her as bright and cheerful, and she had even joined in on a poolside activity earlier that day. The family reunited for lunch, spent some time together by the pool. A photograph taken around 2:29 p.m. that day would become iconic. Madeleine smiling in the sun with her father and siblings. Later, Kate took the children back to the apartment for a nap. At 5:30 p.m, the kids returned to the kids' club for the evening session. The McCanns then brought them back to apartment 5A just before 7 p.m. and began preparing for the night's usual routine. Another dinner with the Tapas 7 at the Ocean Club's tapas restaurant, roughly 55 metres away from their apartment, but with a hedge and a pool complex in between. They put the children to bed at around 7:30 p.m. Madeleine was placed in her bed closest to the window. The twins, Amelie and Sean, shared a cot in the adjacent space. The children's bedroom had a window facing the street, covered by heavy curtains, with a shutter outside. The McCanns claimed they closed the shutter and curtains that night before heading out. They left the patio doors slightly ajar, a common practice, they said, for easier access during their checks. The group of adults sat down for dinner at 8:30 p.m. Their routine involved each parent taking turns to walk back to their apartment every 15 to 30 minutes to check on the children. The first check that night was made by Jerry at around 9:05 p.m. He entered through the patio doors and saw all 3 children asleep. He later said he noticed the bedroom door slightly more open than he had left it, but thought nothing of it. On his way back, Jerry encountered a guest named Jeremy Wilkins, who was pushing his child in a stroller. They chatted briefly near the path between apartment 5A and the street. At around 9:15 p.m, Jane Tanner, one of the friends dining with the McCanns, left the table to check on her own children. As she walked past apartment 5A, she later claimed she saw a man carrying a small child across the road. She described the man as wearing beige trousers and a dark jacket, and the child, possibly Madeleine, as having bare legs and light-coloured pyjamas. However, Jerry did not see Jane on his way back from his check just moments earlier, leading to immediate scrutiny and questions of timing. Kate was scheduled to do the next check at 10 p.m, but around 9:30 p.m, Matthew Oldfield, another member of the Tapas group, offered to check on the McCann's children during his own round. He later testified that he noticed the children's bedroom door open wider than expected, but did not enter the room fully or see the children, a detail that would haunt the case. He heard no noise and everything appeared normal. At 10 p.m, Kate McCann stood up from the dinner table and walked back to apartment 5A for her check. What happened next would change her life forever. Kate entered the apartment through the patio doors. She immediately sensed that something was wrong. The bedroom door was wide open, more than it had been before. She stepped into the room, and Madeleine was gone. Her bed was empty. The twins lay asleep in their cots, undisturbed. In a panic, Kate ran out of the apartment, shouting, "Madeleine's gone! Someone's taken her!" The other guests at the tapas bar scrambled. Confusion turned quickly into chaos. The police were called at 10:14 p.m, but the timeline after that becomes murky. Witness accounts diverged, memories faded, and what followed was a night that raised as many questions as answers. Staff from the Ocean Club and other guests joined in a frantic search around the resort. Volunteers combed through alleyways, tennis courts, and shrubland. Resort staff locked down entrances and exits, but hours had already passed since Madeleine was last seen. At some point, Kate reportedly said the window in Madeleine's room had been open and the external shutter raised, a detail that seemed to suggest a break-in. But fingerprints were absent, and no signs of forced entry were clearly documented. Portuguese police arrived on the scene around 11:10 p.m. Their initial response has since been criticised as disorganised and slow. Officers failed to secure the perimeter. Guests and friends moved freely through the apartment. Potential evidence was contaminated. The apartment was not sealed until the following morning. In the coming days, flyers were printed, posters put up, and the media frenzy began. Portuguese police treated the case as a potential abduction, but inconsistencies in statements, particularly about the state of the shutters, the window, and whether entry had been forced, began to cast doubt on that narrative. The sighting reported by Jane Tanner, the man carrying a child, became central. For years, police pursued this sighting as potentially crucial to Madeleine's abduction. But in 2013, British investigators from Operation Grange concluded that the man seen by Tanner was likely another vacationer returning his own child from the night creche. A devastating blow to one of the case's only early leads. Another reported sighting that night came from Irishman Martin Smith, who, along with his family, saw a man carrying a small child in pyjamas near Rua da Escola Primaria close to 10 p.m. They described the man as appearing uncomfortable and avoiding eye contact. Years later, Smith would suggest that the man resembled Jerry McCann, although this claim was made after seeing footage of him carrying one of the twins off a plane. The statement was controversial and widely disputed. Despite these conflicting accounts, one thing was tragically clear. Sometime between 9 p.m. and 10 p.m, Madeleine McCann vanished. In the aftermath, the McCanns launched an international campaign to find their daughter. With the support of the British government and private donors, they raised over £2 million in a fund to aid the search. Posters of Madeleine appeared in airports, shops and websites across the world. Her eye defect, that distinctive coloboma, became a key feature in the posters, emphasising a unique identifier for public recognition. Praia da Luz, once a sleepy resort, was transformed into a media circus. Satellite trucks lined the streets. Reporters from every continent arrived. The case of the missing British girl had gone global, but behind the press conferences and poster campaigns, a deeper unease began to settle in. There were no demands, no ransom notes, no credible suspects, no physical evidence, and no sign of Madeleine. As the hours turned into days, and the days into weeks, a chilling realisation began to set in. Madeleine McCann had vanished without a trace. Chapter 3. Initial Investigation and Developments. From the moment Madeleine McCann vanished, the investigation into her disappearance became a labyrinth of missed opportunities, procedural missteps, and growing tension between British and Portuguese authorities. What should have been a focused and coordinated search for a missing child slowly spiralled into a fractured, politically charged operation, one that would span years, cost millions, and raise more questions than answers. The Polícia Judiciária, Portugal's criminal police, led the initial response, but almost immediately the investigation was hampered by the delay in securing the crime scene. Apartment 5A, where Madeleine had slept, was not treated as a sealed crime scene until the following morning. In that window of time, concerned friends, staff, and well-meaning neighbours had walked through the apartment, touching doors, windows, and furniture, inadvertently contaminating crucial forensic evidence. The first theory adopted by Portuguese police was that Madeleine had wandered off, a tragic but accidental disappearance. But Kate and Gerry McCann were adamant Madeleine would never have left the apartment on her own. She was only 3 years old. She was shy, a creature of routine, and afraid of the dark. As the hours passed and that theory lost traction, police shifted toward abduction. A stranger entering through the patio doors or window, snatching the child while her siblings lay asleep. But doubts began to emerge quickly, especially around the shutter and window. Kate reported that the window in the children's bedroom had been open and the shutter raised, indicating a break-in. Yet when investigators examined the window and shutter, they found no evidence of forced entry, no fingerprints on the window frame, and no disturbance to the dusty windowsill. Forensic officers stated the shutters would have had to be raised from the inside. Despite these inconsistencies, the McCann's version of events was largely accepted in the early stages. The Portuguese police focused their search on known sex offenders, local workers, and resort guests, interviewing dozens and collecting statements. Several sightings flooded in, from Portugal and abroad: a man seen carrying a child, a woman seen boarding a ferry, a blonde toddler matching Madeleine's description in Morocco. Each one was investigated. None bore fruit. One of the first controversial moments in the case came just weeks later when Robert Murat, a British-Portuguese property consultant who lived near the Ocean Club, was named an arguido, a formal suspect. Murat had inserted himself into the investigation, offering to translate for police and media, which raised suspicions. Police searched his home, his mother's property, and his electronics, but no evidence was ever found linking him to the crime. Murat was eventually cleared, but not before his name was dragged through international headlines. The relationship between the McCanns and Portuguese investigators began to strain. The McCanns hired private PR teams and launched a media campaign that some saw as strategic and controlling. They were advised by British political figures, including the then Prime Minister Gordon Brown. In the UK press, the McCanns were largely portrayed sympathetically, grieving parents desperately searching for their daughter. In the Portuguese media, however, sentiment began to shift. Questions emerged about why they had left their children unattended. Some coverage implied recklessness, even deception. By the summer of 2007, tensions reached boiling point. Portuguese police began to reconsider their approach. What if Madeleine had not been taken by a stranger? What if something had happened inside the apartment? Something the parents were not telling them. On the 6th of August 2007, British sniffer dogs, trained to detect human blood and the scent of a decomposing body, were brought into the investigation. The dogs, Eddie and Keela, were taken through apartment 5A, the McCann's rental car, and various personal items. Their reactions were dramatic. Eddie alerted to the scent of a cadaver in the living room behind the sofa, on Kate McCann's clothing, and on Madeleine's soft toy cuddle cat. In the rental car, Keela detected traces of blood in the boot compartment. Portuguese police believed this was a breakthrough, but crucially, no conclusive DNA evidence could be extracted from the samples. The decomposed blood in the car, they argued, could not be definitively tied to Madeleine. Still, the momentum of the investigation shifted dramatically. On 7th September 2007, Kate and Gerry McCann were themselves declared arguidos, formal suspects. They were interrogated for hours. Police reportedly pressed the theory that Madeleine had died accidentally, perhaps after sedation, and that the couple had covered it up and disposed of the body. The McCanns vehemently denied any involvement. They refused to answer some of the questions during interrogation, citing legal advice, and returned to the UK shortly after. Their arguido status was lifted the following July, but the damage was already done. The media firestorm intensified, and the court of public opinion fractured. In early 2008, the case was shelved by Portuguese authorities due to a lack of evidence. Officially, it remained unsolved. Unofficially, blame, suspicion, and misinformation lingered like fog. Amid the chaos, the McCanns continued their campaign. They created the Find Madeleine Fund, launched a website, and hired private investigators, including controversial firms such as Méthode 13, whose claims, including that Madeleine had been kidnapped by a Moroccan child trafficking ring, garnered headlines but no results. In 2011, the British government intervened. Then Prime Minister David Cameron ordered a Scotland Yard review of the case, known as Operation Grange. It was a response to a direct appeal from the McCanns and mounting public pressure. The Metropolitan Police combed through thousands of pages of documents from both UK and Portuguese investigators. They developed a timeline reconstruction, identified discrepancies, and raised new leads. One revelation from the review was that the original Portuguese investigation had failed to act on certain key tips and had not fully explored the timeline between 8:30 p.m. and 10 p.m. on the night Madeleine vanished. Operation Grange concluded that the abduction theory remained the most plausible. They focused on a burglary gone wrong scenario, suggesting Madeleine may have disturbed a thief and been taken in panic. But critics called the theory speculative. No trace of forced entry was found, and no items were stolen. In 2013, Operation Grange publicly released e-fits of several men seen in the area around the time of the disappearance, including a man carrying a child. None led to a breakthrough. A high-profile Crime Watch episode reignited interest in the case, resulting in hundreds of new leads, all of which were followed up, and none of which resulted in a resolution. Portuguese police, meanwhile, reopened their investigation in parallel, working in tandem, and occasionally at odds, with the British team. Digs were carried out in 2014 in areas near the Ocean Club, including a wasteland and drainage systems. Again, no evidence was found. Throughout all this, the McCanns continued to be both media advocates and media targets. Accusations, defamation, and conspiracy theories swirled, many rooted in poor translation of Portuguese documents or incomplete leaks to the press. One of the most significant legal clashes came when Gonçalo Amaral, the former lead Portuguese detective, published a book in 2008 titled The Truth of the Lie, which alleged that Madeleine had died in the apartment and her parents had staged an abduction. The McCanns sued for defamation, and a lengthy legal battle followed. In 2015, a Portuguese court initially ruled in their favour, awarding them damages. But in 2017, that decision was overturned, and Amaral was cleared. By 2017, Madeleine would have turned 14 years old. A decade had passed, and yet, still, no answers. The timeline remained full of shadows, the evidence inconclusive, the witnesses inconsistent, the theories speculative, but the case remained open, and hope, however slim, endured. Chapter 4. Emergence of a Prime Suspect. For over a decade, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann remained one of the world's most confounding cold cases, saturated with theories, speculation, and dashed hopes. But in June 2020, a name finally emerged from the haze. Not just a person of interest, not just another theory, a prime suspect, Christian Bruckner, a 43-year-old German national with a long criminal history. a man who had lived in the Algarve at the time of Madeleine's disappearance, a man whose past trailed a litany of violence, theft and sexual crimes, some against children. The announcement came not from the UK or Portuguese police, but from Germany's Federal Criminal Police Office, and it was unequivocal. They were treating the Madeleine McCann case as a murder investigation, and Christian Bruckner was their main suspect. So, who was he? And why had it taken 13 years for his name to surface? Born in Würzburg, Germany, Bruckner had a troubled upbringing. After a series of run-ins with the law in his youth, including theft, drug offences and child sex abuse, he relocated to Portugal in the 1990s, settling in the Algarve. There, he lived off the grid in ramshackle properties and camper vans, making money through burglary, drug trafficking and odd jobs. Police later revealed that Bruckner had been living just a few minutes' drive from the Ocean Club resort in Praia da Luz in May 2007. In fact, he had resided in the area for several years, and his mobile phone had been pinged near the apartment complex on the very night Madeleine disappeared. This mobile phone data would become a cornerstone of the case. On 3 May 2007, between 7:30 p.m. and 8 p.m, Bruckner's phone had received a half-hour call while near the McCann apartment. Investigators have never revealed the identity of the other caller, but it placed Bruckner within direct proximity of the crime scene in the key window before Madeleine was reported missing at 10 p.m. But the breakthrough didn't happen overnight. In truth, Christian Bruckner's name had surfaced multiple times over the years in relation to other crimes. In 2013, he was convicted of sexually abusing a child in Germany. In 2018, he was convicted for the 2005 rape of a 72-year-old American woman in her apartment in Praia da Luz, a crime that bore eerie similarities to what investigators believed may have happened to Madeleine. That case had long remained unsolved. The woman had been bound, blindfolded, and brutally assaulted. DNA evidence recovered years later finally led to Bruckner's conviction. That conviction, and Bruckner's proximity to Praia da Luz, prompted German authorities to take a fresh look at his past. It was during this review that investigators made a chilling discovery. In 2007, shortly after Madeleine vanished, Bruckner had suddenly returned to Germany. He sold his car, a yellow and white VW camper van, and allegedly made comments to acquaintances hinting that he knew what had happened to Madeleine. In one instance, he reportedly said something to the effect of, "She didn't scream." More disturbing still, investigators found that Bruckner kept trophies of his crimes. Among the items seized from his possession were USB drives containing child sexual abuse material, buried beneath his dog's dead body in a plastic bag. Also found were numerous photos and videos, some depicting violent acts. Police have never publicly confirmed whether any of these images were linked to Madeleine, but their existence painted a grim picture of Bruckner's psyche. The German authorities' confidence in Bruckner's guilt was striking. In 2020, German prosecutor Hans Christian Wolters stated publicly, "We are sure he killed Madeleine McCann." But they were equally blunt about their challenge. They had no body, no definitive forensic evidence, and no confession. Their case relied heavily on circumstantial evidence, behavioural patterns, and digital data. In contrast, UK and Portuguese investigators remained more cautious. Scotland Yard continued to treat the case as a missing person investigation, not a homicide. The Portuguese authorities, still overseeing the jurisdiction where the crime occurred, officially named Bruckner a person of interest, but stopped short of charging him. For his part, Bruckner denied any involvement. In letters from prison and through his lawyer, he claimed he was being framed and that the media portrayal of him as a monster was part of a coordinated campaign. "They have no evidence," he insisted. Still, the circumstantial links were hard to ignore. Beyond the phone records and location data, there were testimonies from former associates. One ex-girlfriend claimed he had told her he wanted to capture something small and use it for a few days. A former friend alleged Bruckner once admitted he would never go back to prison because he had done something bad in Portugal. And then there were his vehicles. At the time of Madeleine's disappearance, Bruckner was using two key vehicles, a VW camper van and a Jaguar XJR6. The Jaguar was registered in his name but was re-registered to another person the day after Madeleine vanished. A suspiciously timed transfer. Investigators believe he may have used one or both of these vehicles to abduct and transport the child. Despite the flurry of media attention and renewed global interest, no charges related to Madeleine have yet been filed against Bruckner. In April 2022, Portuguese prosecutors officially declared him an arguido. This move was widely interpreted as a measure to preserve the statute of limitations, which was nearing expiration. In October 2022, German prosecutors did bring charges against Bruckner, but not in connection to Madeleine. Instead, they charged him with 5 separate sex crimes, including the rape of a teenager and the sexual abuse of multiple children in Portugal between 2000 and 2017. These charges serve to underscore Bruckner's profile, one of long-standing predation. Investigators say they are continuing to build their case against him regarding Madeleine, though the burden of proof remains high. Without a body, a confession, or clear forensic evidence, the case against Christian Bruckner, while compelling, may never be airtight. And so, even with a named suspect, the question at the heart of this story remains unresolved. What really happened to Madeleine McCann? Was Christian Bruckner the man responsible? Or is he, as he claims, simply a convenient scapegoat, a criminal who fits the narrative too neatly? Years have passed. Investigations have crossed borders, drawn in the world's top forensic minds, and captured the public's attention like no other missing persons case in modern history. Yet the mystery continues. And the McCanns, still searching, still waiting, hold on to hope, even as the world drifts further from answers. Chapter 5. Closing Thoughts. The disappearance of Madeleine McCann has haunted the world for over 17 years. It is a story filled with painful unknowns, a quiet resort, a shattered family, a global frenzy, and a child who vanished into the night with no trace. The tragedy, at its core, is simple and devastating. A 3-year-old girl went to bed on a family holiday and was never seen again. As the years passed, the narrative became layered by missteps, by media storms, by shifting suspects and false hopes. The early days of the investigation were marked by confusion and controversy. Portuguese police struggled under the weight of public scrutiny, and the McCanns themselves were cast in the unbearable position of both grieving parents and unofficial suspects. And then, years later, came a name, Christian Bruckner, a man whose history of violence and predation seemed to make him a plausible suspect. A man whose phone data, criminal past, and disturbing patterns of behaviour positioned him in the right place at the worst possible time. Yet, even with all the circumstantial evidence, no concrete link has ever been proven. No trial, no confession, no closure. For Kate and Jerry McCann, the pain remains unimaginable. In their words, hope is what carries us through. They have held on to that hope through birthdays missed, Christmases without joy, and milestones that never came. Madeleine would be 21 years old today. Her room, once decorated in pinks and soft toys, has become a time capsule, a space frozen in the innocence of 2007, a reminder of who she was, of who she might have become. This case is not just about a mystery. It is about loss. It is about every parent's nightmare and every investigator's burden. It is about a little girl with a wide smile and curious eyes, whose story became a symbol of both tragedy and tenacity. Perhaps one day we will have answers. Perhaps the truth still lies buried, in a memory, in a mistake, or in a place no one has thought to look. Until then, the question remains, where is Madeleine McCann? This tragedy reminds us that behind the headlines are real people, real consequences, and real pain. Thank you for listening, and remember to subscribe for more true crime.